The smell of industrial disinfectant couldn't mask the stench of my own urine as I sat in the wheelchair they'd parked in the corner of Willowbrook Manor's reception area, watching my 3 children sign the papers that would lock me away. My daughter Sarah's hand moved across the signature line with the same efficiency she'd used to pack my belongings into garbage bags that morning, while my sons Michael and David flanked her like bodyguards, their eyes avoiding the wet stain spreading across my lap. "Mom's episodes have been getting worse," Sarah told the intake coordinator, a woman whose name tag read Beverly in cheerful yellow letters. "The wandering at night, the confusion. We found her trying to cook at 3 in the morning last week. She left the gas on." I hadn't left anything on. I'd been making tea because I couldn't sleep after overhearing them on a conference call, discussing how to divide my house once they had me declared incompetent. But my mouth wouldn't form the words properly anymore, not since the small stroke 6 months ago that had given them their opening. The left side of my face drooped like melting wax, and when I tried to speak, only garbled sounds emerged, though my mind remained sharp as broken glass. "We have all her medical records here," Michael added, sliding a thick folder across the desk. He'd been the one to drive me to all those appointments with Dr. Patel, the geriatric specialist who'd run test after test, frowning at results I was never allowed to see. Dr. Patel agrees that 24-hour care is essential now. The intake coordinator nodded sympathetically, her eyes sliding over me as if I were furniture. "And you have power of attorney?" "Right here." David produced another document, the one they'd had me sign during my recovery from the stroke, when my right hand could barely hold a pen and the medications made everything blur. They'd told me it was for my Medicare forms. I tried to wheel myself forward, but Sarah's hand pressed down on my shoulder, firm and restraining. "She gets agitated," she explained to Beverly. "It's part of the progression." "The progression of what?" I wanted to scream. The progression of their greed. The progression of their plan to take everything I'd spent 40 years building after their father left us with nothing but debt and empty promises. But all that came out was a low moan that made Beverly's expression shift to professional concern. "We have an excellent memory care unit," Beverly assured them. "Locked doors for wandering prevention, specialized staff, activities designed for cognitive stimulation. Your mother will be safe here." Safe. The word tasted like copper in my mouth. I'd been safe in my own home until 3 weeks ago, when Michael had changed my locks while I was at a doctor's appointment, claiming he'd lost his key. Safe until Sarah started hiding my phone, saying I'd been making confused calls to strangers. Safe until David began showing up at odd hours, going through my papers, asking about my accounts with an urgency that set my teeth on edge. "The house will need to be sold, of course," Sarah was saying now, already discussing my assets, as if I'd evaporated, "to cover the costs. This place isn't cheap." "Understandably," Beverly agreed. "Quality care requires resources. Now, about her personal belongings. We've brought what she needs." Michael gestured to 2 small suitcases by the door. 2 suitcases to hold 70 years of life. Clothes, some photos. Nothing valuable. She tends to hide things, accuse people of stealing. Another lie. I'd never accused anyone of stealing until I'd caught David in my jewelry box, pocketing my mother's diamond ring. But when I'd tried to confront him, the words had come out jumbled, and he'd simply patted my hand and said I was confused again. Beverly stood, smoothing her scrubs. "Well then, let's get Mrs. Chen settled in her room." We have a lovely corner unit available in the memory care wing." They wheeled me down a hallway that reeked of floor wax and industrial cleaning supplies, past rooms where shadows of other discarded parents sat motionless in their beds, staring at televisions that droned endlessly. Some called out as we passed, voices cracking with loneliness or confusion or both. This was to be my world now, this fluorescent-lit purgatory where my children could forget I existed, except for monthly visits that would dwindle to holidays, then to nothing. The corner unit was small, maybe 12 by 12 feet, with a single bed, a narrow closet, and a window that faced a concrete wall. They'd tried to make it cheerful, with pale yellow walls and a border of painted sunflowers, but it felt like a decorated cell. "The bathroom has safety rails," Beverly was explaining to Sarah, who nodded along like she cared about my safety. "And there's an emergency pull cord beside the bed." They transferred me from the wheelchair to the bed, and I felt my body's betrayal in every uncoordinated movement. The stroke had stolen my grace, but not my comprehension. I understood every word, every implication, every cold calculation behind my children's concerned expressions. "We'll let you say goodbye," Beverly said tactfully, stepping outside. For a moment, silence fell like a heavy curtain. My 3 children stood around my bed, and I saw them clearly for perhaps the first time, not as the babies I'd raised alone, working 3 jobs to keep them fed and clothed and educated, but as the strangers they'd become. Sarah with her designer handbag worth more than my monthly Social Security check. Michael with his new BMW keys jangling in his pocket. David with his nervous fidget, the same one he'd had as a child when he'd broken something and hoped I wouldn't notice. "This is for the best, Mom," Sarah said finally, not quite meeting my eyes. "You need more care than we can provide." Ore, I wanted to remind her that I'd provided care for her when she was 15 and pregnant, too scared to tell anyone but me. That I'd held her hand through 20 hours of labor and raised her daughter alongside her while she finished high school. But my tongue lay thick and useless in my mouth. "We'll visit," Michael added, already backing toward the door. "Once you're settled." I'd settled him through rehab twice, mortgaging my house the second time to pay for the treatment center that finally worked. 90 days of driving 2 hours each way for family therapy sessions, telling myself it would be worth it when he got clean. And it had been, until now. "The house sale should cover everything," David said, the numbers clearly running through his head. "For a few years at least." A few years. They'd already calculated how long I'd last. Sarah leaned down to kiss my forehead, a perfunctory gesture that smelled of expensive perfume and finality. "Be good, Mom. Don't give them trouble." And then they were gone, their footsteps echoing down the hallway, leaving me alone in this 12 by 12 box with its painted sunflowers and emergency pull cord. I lay there, feeling the wet sheets beneath me, smelling my own humiliation, and tried to remember how to cry. But even that simple release had been stolen by the stroke. Beverly returned with an aide, a young woman with kind eyes and gentle hands, who helped me into clean clothes without commenting on my accident. They spoke to me in that bright, slow voice people use with children and the demented, explaining the routine. Meals at set times, activities in the common room, medications distributed by the nurse's station. "Your family left your paperwork," Beverly said, setting a manila folder on my nightstand. "Insurance cards, medical history, contact information. And this envelope. Your daughter said it was important papers you'd want to keep with you. I thought I couldn't see what was in the envelope from where I lay, but something about it nagged at me. Sarah had been very specific about that envelope when she'd packed my things, making sure it was included. Mom's important papers, she'd told Michael and David. She gets upset if she doesn't know where they are. The aide finished settling me in bed, pulling the blankets up to my chin like I was a child. There's a call button right here if you need anything, she said, placing it near my right hand, the one that still worked somewhat normally. Someone checks on every resident every 2 hours during the night. Every 2 hours. Like a prison welfare check. They left me alone finally, and I lay there listening to the sounds of this place. The distant beep of machines, the shuffle of slippered feet in the hallway. Someone crying behind a closed door. This was my life now, reduced to scheduled meals and supervised activities and 2-hour welfare checks. I thought about my house, sitting empty now, except for whatever staging furniture Sarah would bring in to maximize the sale price. The garden I'd tended for 30 years would die without water. The neighbor's cat, who came for breakfast every morning, would wait on my porch, confused. The photo albums I'd carefully maintained, documenting every birthday and graduation and Christmas, would end up in storage or the trash, depending on how much of a hurry my children were in to empty the place. My right hand, the one that still partially obeyed my commands, fumbled for the envelope on the nightstand. It took 3 tries to grasp it, and another 2 to work it open. Inside was a small stack of papers, and on top, a document I didn't recognize at first. The letterhead read, Willowbrook Manor Resident Agreement, and below it, several pages of dense legal text. But it was the sticky note attached to the front that made my heart stutter. Sarah's handwriting, neat and precise. Mom, they need you to sign where indicated. Standard admission forms. Standard admission forms. But I hadn't signed anything. I couldn't sign anything, not with my hand the way it was. Which meant I looked closer, squinting to focus my still good eye. There was my signature, shaky but recognizable, on 3 different lines. Dated today. Witnessed by Beverly and another staff member I hadn't met. They'd forged it. My own children had forged my signature on my admission papers. The rage that flooded through me was hot and clarifying, burning away the fog of medication and self-pity. I forced myself to read through the document, though it took enormous effort to focus on the small print. Most of it was standard. Consent to treatment, acknowledgement of policies, agreement to pay specified rates. But there, on the second to last page, was a paragraph that made me read 3 times to be sure I understood. Resident agrees to binding arbitration for any and all disputes arising from care, treatment, or financial arrangements. Resident waives right to jury trial. Resident acknowledges that this agreement supersedes any previous power of attorney or advance directives unless specifically exempted in Addendum C. Addendum C. I shuffled through the papers, looking for it, but there was no Addendum C, which meant my power of attorney, the one my children were using to control everything, was now superseded by this agreement. An agreement I supposedly signed myself, of my own free will, while of sound mind. The implications started to unfold in my mind like a terrible flower. If I had signed this myself, while competent, then I had effectively given Willowbrook Manor more authority over my care than my children had. They'd thought they were clever, forging my signature to lock me away. but they'd also accidentally signed away their own power. I lay back against the thin pillow, my mind racing despite my body's betrayals. There had to be more to this. Sarah was too smart to make such a simple mistake. Unless she hadn't read the whole agreement. Unless she'd been so eager to get me committed that she'd just signed where Beverly had indicated, trusting that it was indeed standard. A knock on my door interrupted my thoughts. An older woman in scrubs entered, carrying a small cup of pills. "Mrs. Chen, I'm Patricia, the night nurse. Time for your evening medications." I looked at the pills. 2 white ones, 1 blue, 1 yellow. I didn't recognize any of them. Patricia must have seen my confusion because she consulted her chart. Donepezil for memory, risperidone for agitation, trazodone for sleep, and metoprolol for blood pressure. Dr. Patel prescribed them. Risperidone for agitation? I wasn't agitated. And donepezil, that was for Alzheimer's. I didn't have Alzheimer's. The stroke had affected my speech and some motor function, but my memory was intact. What had Dr. Patel told my children? I shook my head, pushing the cup away with my good hand. "Now, Mrs. Chen." Patricia's voice took on that patronizing tone I was already learning to hate. "You need to take your medications. Doctor's orders." I shook my head harder, clamping my mouth shut. Patricia sighed. "I'll have to mark you as non-compliant. That goes in your file, you know. Too many non-compliant marks, and we have to consider more intensive interventions." More intensive interventions. The threat was clear, even wrapped in medical euphemism. Take the pills voluntarily, or they'd find ways to make me. But I held firm, turning my face away. Patricia made a note on her chart and left, taking the pills with her. I knew she'd be back. They always came back. But for tonight, I'd won this small victory. The next 3 days blurred together in a routine of indignities. Breakfast at 7, lukewarm oatmeal and juice that tasted like sweetened water. Activities at 9, mindless crafts designed for people whose minds had truly fled, not those of us trapped in broken bodies with intact consciousness. Lunch at noon, more activities, dinner at 5. Medications I continued to refuse, earning me a reputation as a difficult resident. On the 4th day, Sarah visited. She breezed in wearing her work clothes, all crisp blazer and clicking heels, carrying a bouquet of grocery store flowers that she placed on my nightstand without really looking at them or me. "Mom, the nurses tell me you're not taking your medications," she started immediately, not bothering with pleasantries. "You need to cooperate. This is hard enough without you making trouble." I stared at her, willing her to see me, really see me, behind this drooping face and uncooperative body. But she was checking her phone, already distracted by whatever crisis existed in her real life, the one that mattered. "The real estate agent thinks we can list the house next week," she continued, scrolling through messages. "Once we clear out your things. Michael found a company that does estate sales. They'll handle everything for a percentage. An estate sale, like I was already dead." I reached for the envelope on my nightstand, the one with the admission papers, and pushed it toward her with my good hand. She glanced at it, then away. "Yes, Mom. I made sure all your papers were brought here. Don't worry about all that. We're handling everything." But she hadn't looked at them, hadn't read what she'd signed. The irony was almost beautiful. She'd been so sure of my incompetence that she'd never considered her own. A memory surfaced then, sharp and sudden. 20 years ago, when Sarah was in law school. She'd come home for Christmas break, full of stories about her contracts class, her brilliant professor, the fascinating cases they'd studied. "The devil's in the details, Mom," she'd told me over coffee in my kitchen, the kitchen she was now preparing to sell. "That's what Professor Martinez always says. One overlooked clause can change everything. That's why you always read everything before you sign." But she hadn't read this. None of them had. "I have to go," Sarah said, already standing. "Big presentation tomorrow. But I'll try to come by next week. Please, Mom, take your medications. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." She kissed my forehead again, that same perfunctory gesture, and was gone before I could even attempt to speak. The grocery store flowers sat on my nightstand, already wilting in the overheated air. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in the narrow bed, listening to the night sounds of the nursing home, the distant call of someone asking for help, the squeak of rubber soles on linoleum, the mechanical breath of oxygen machines. And I planned. My body might be broken, but my mind was clear. Clearer, perhaps, than it had been in years, sharpened by anger and the terrible clarity that comes with betrayal. I needed to understand exactly what my children had done, and more importantly, what they'd overlooked in their haste to be rid of me. The next morning brought Dr. Patel. He entered my room with Beverly and Patricia, his white coat pristine, his expression carefully neutral. I hadn't seen him since the last appointment Michael had driven me to, the one where he'd spoken mostly to my son rather than to me. "Good morning, Mrs. Chen," he said, pulling up the single visitor's chair. "I understand you've been refusing your medications." I stared at him, noting the way he avoided direct eye contact, the nervous tap of his pen against his clipboard. "Your children are very concerned," he continued. "The medications I've prescribed are essential for managing your condition." "What condition?" I wanted to scream, but all that emerged was a frustrated grunt. "Doctor." Patel made a note. "As you can see, the speech difficulties persist, and the staff report significant confusion, agitation, resistance to care, all consistent with the diagnosis." The diagnosis. There it was, the thing they'd hidden from me. I pointed at his clipboard with my good hand, then at myself, trying to communicate that I wanted to see my own medical records. But he misinterpreted, or chose to. "Yes, we're documenting everything carefully," he assured me. "Your children will receive regular updates on your progress." Beverly stepped forward. "Perhaps we should consider a mild sedative, Doctor, just to ease the transition. Mrs. Chen seems very distressed." "That might be wise," Dr. Patel agreed, already writing a prescription. "Something gentle, just to help with the adjustment period." They discussed me like I wasn't there, their voices floating over my head as they debated dosages and delivery methods. I felt like I was disappearing, becoming invisible even to myself. After they left, I forced myself to think strategically. If I couldn't speak, couldn't write clearly, couldn't make them understand, I had to find another way. The admission agreement was key. I was sure of it. But I needed to know more about what exactly it meant. The opportunity came 2 days later in the form of Leonard. Leonard was what the staff called a high-functioning resident, which meant he could still walk, talk, and remember his own name most of the time. He'd been a lawyer, he told anyone who'd listen, specialized in elder law, before the ironic twist of ending up in a nursing home himself. I encountered him in the common room during afternoon activities. He was sitting apart from the group, making tissue paper flowers, reading a newspaper with a magnifying glass. I wheeled myself over, deliberately bumping his chair to get his attention. "Careful there," he said, looking up. Then, seeing my face more clearly, "You're the new one, Chen, right? The one who won't take her pills." I nodded, then pointed at his newspaper, at the legal notices section he'd been reading. "Interested in the law?" He studied me more carefully. "You know, you don't look as confused as they say you are." I shook my head vigorously, then pointed at myself and made a gesture of clarity, tapping my temple. Leonard leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Ah, one of those situations. Let me guess. Family placement? Power of attorney? The whole 9 yards?" I nodded again, relief flooding through me that someone understood. "Happens more than you'd think," he said. "Kids get impatient, especially when there's money involved. Property?" Another nod. "Figures." He folded his newspaper. "You know, I still remember most of the law. Brain's not completely gone yet. What is it you want to know?" I struggled to communicate, finally managing to gesture writing. Leonard understood immediately and pulled a small notebook from his pocket. "What do you want to know about?" he asked, pen ready. I pointed at the door, trying to indicate the admission process, then made a signing gesture. "Admission agreements?" He wrote it down. "Signatures? Authority?" "Yes, yes, yes." I nodded emphatically. Leonard tapped his pen against the notebook. "Here's the thing about nursing home admissions. They're contracts, and contracts require competent parties. If someone signs you in claiming you're incompetent, but you sign your own admission papers, that creates an interesting paradox." My heart raced. I was right. There was something there. "Of course," Leonard continued, "it all depends on the specific language of the agreement. Some give the facility broad powers. Others are more limited. Do you have a copy?" I nodded, gesturing toward my room. "Not now," he said quietly, glancing at the aide supervising the activity room. "They watch the troublemakers, and we both qualify. But there's a gap in the shift change at 7 p.m. Hallway's usually empty for about 15 minutes. Can you manage that?" I could. I would. The rest of the afternoon crawled by. Dinner was the usual institutional fare: overcooked chicken, mushy vegetables, a roll that could double as a hockey puck. I forced myself to eat, knowing I'd need strength for whatever came next. At 7 o'clock exactly, I was in the hallway outside my room. Leonard appeared moments later, moving with surprising stealth for a man his age. "Quick," he said, and we went into my room. I fumbled for the envelope, my uncooperative hand making everything take longer. Leonard waited patiently until I managed to extract the agreement. He read quickly, his lawyer's mind still sharp despite his surroundings. Standard. Ah, wait. This is interesting. Very interesting." He pointed to the arbitration clause I'd noticed before. "This is ironclad. By signing this, you've agreed that all disputes go through Willowbrook's internal arbitration process. No outside courts. But here's the kicker. It says the resident agrees, not the resident's representative or power of attorney. The resident." I made a questioning gesture. "Don't you see?" His eyes lit up with the old fire of legal discovery. "If you're competent enough to sign this agreement yourself, then the power of attorney your kids are using could be challenged. But if you're not competent, then this agreement is invalid, because you couldn't have legally signed it." The paradox. My children had created an impossible situation in their haste. "But wait," Leonard continued, reading further. There's more. Section 7, subsection 3. Resident maintains the right to designate a healthcare advocate, independent of any existing power of attorney arrangements. Such designation must be filed with the facility administrator within 30 days of admission. 30 days. I had 30 days to name someone else, someone who could speak for me. The question is, Leonard said, handing back the papers, who would you trust, and how would you communicate your choice? Before I could attempt an answer, we heard footsteps in the hallway. Leonard quickly pocketed his glasses and assumed a confused expression. "Martha!" he called out as Patricia entered. "Martha, is that you? I can't find my room." Patricia sighed. "It's this way, Leonard. Come on." She led him away, but not before he gave me a quick wink. I had an ally. The next week was torture. My children had scheduled the estate sale, and Michael came by with photos on his phone, asking me to point to anything I particularly wanted to keep. "We're being very fair, Mom," he said, swiping through images of my life laid out on tables for strangers to paw through. "Dividing everything 3 ways. Sarah gets the china since she hosts holidays. David wants Dad's old tools from the garage. I'm taking the photo albums for safekeeping. My father's tools. He meant my tools, the ones I'd learned to use after my husband left, fixing everything myself because I couldn't afford repairmen. The photo albums Michael would probably store in his basement and forget. All those carefully preserved memories molding away in the dark. The house showing is tomorrow," he added. "Sarah says we already have 3 interested buyers. Market's hot right now. You're lucky. This will fund your care for years." Lucky. I was lucky to have my life dismantled and sold off piece by piece. After he left, I found Leonard in the common room. He'd been thinking about my situation, he told me. There might be a way. "You need to establish competency," he said quietly, pretending to fumble with a puzzle while we talked. "If you can prove you're mentally sound, everything changes. But how do you do that when you can't speak clearly and your writing is affected?" He'd been researching in the facility's small library, really just a shelf of donated books and outdated magazines, but it included some medical texts. "Strokes affect specific areas," he explained. "Speech, motor function, sometimes comprehension. But standardized cognitive tests don't always require verbal responses. Some can be done by pointing, choosing between options. If I could pass such a test, administered by a neutral party, it would be evidence of my competency. But who would administer it? Dr. Patel was clearly not on my side. "There's a state ombudsman program," Leonard said. "They investigate complaints in nursing homes. If we could get one here. But how to contact them without access to a phone or computer? Without the ability to write clearly?" The answer came from an unexpected source. Her name was Carmen, and she was a nursing student doing her clinical rotation at Willowbrook. Young, eager, still idealistic enough to see residents as people, rather than tasks to be managed. She was assigned to my wing and always took extra time with each resident, actually listening even when they rambled. I tested her one morning when she came to help me dress. I pointed to the admission agreement on my nightstand, then to myself, then shook my head vigorously. "You didn't sign this?" she asked, frowning. I nodded, then pointed to the signature, then made a gesture of someone else writing. Carmen's frown deepened. "Someone else signed for you?" "Yes. God, yes." Finally someone understood. "But that's not legal. Not if you're competent." She looked at me more carefully. "Are you? Competent, I mean?" I nodded so hard my neck hurt, then pointed to my head and made a clear gesture, then to my mouth and made an X. Your mind is clear, but you can't speak. Yes, yes, yes. Carmen bit her lip, clearly conflicted. I could get in trouble. Students aren't supposed to get involved in legal matters. I could see her wrestling with it. Duty versus ethics, career versus conscience. I reached out with my good hand and grasped hers, squeezing with all the desperation I felt. Okay, she whispered. What do you need? What followed was a delicate dance of communication. Through gestures, pointing, and Carmen's patient interpretation, I managed to convey what I needed. Contact with the state ombudsman, a cognitive evaluation by someone other than Dr. Patel, and access to my full medical records. Carmen was scared but determined. My aunt went through something similar, she told me. Her kids tried to take everything. I've seen what this does to families. She couldn't make official calls from the facility, but she could from her personal phone after hours. It took 3 days, but she managed it. The ombudsman's office would send someone the following week. Meanwhile, my children were moving forward with their plans. The house had sold, cash offer, quick closing. Sarah brought the papers for me to review, though of course she didn't expect me to understand them. $350, she said, as if the number should mean something to me in my supposed confusion. More than we expected, honestly. After the mortgage is paid off and the bills, there should be enough for 5 years here. Maybe 6, if we're careful. The mortgage. I'd paid off that mortgage 3 years ago, a fact I'd celebrated with a cake and champagne, alone in my kitchen. Either Sarah didn't know, or she was lying to my face, assuming I wouldn't remember. I pointed at the papers, then made a writing gesture. You want to sign? Sarah looked surprised. Mom, you don't need to. We have power of attorney. But I insisted, gesturing more urgently. Okay, okay. She helped me hold the pen, guiding my shaking hand. But instead of signing my name, I managed to scrawl "Help" in large, shaky letters across the signature line. Sarah snatched the papers back. Mom, these are legal documents. She pulled out new copies from her briefcase. Never mind, I'll handle it. She forged my signature right there in front of me, practiced and smooth. Then she left, muttering about my deteriorating condition and how the medications clearly weren't working. The ombudsman arrived the following Tuesday. Her name was Grace Winters, and she came with an air of authority that made Beverly nervous. We received a complaint, Grace said, her voice carrying the kind of steel that comes from years of fighting bureaucracy. I'll need to interview Mrs. Chen privately. She's nonverbal, Beverly protested. Confused. I don't think... That's for me to determine, Grace cut her off. Private interview, please. When we were alone, Grace pulled out a tablet. Mrs. Chen, I'm going to administer a standardized cognitive assessment. It's designed for nonverbal responses. Just point to your answers. Do you understand? I nodded vigorously. What followed was the most important test of my life. Pattern recognition, memory sequences, logical problems, all things I could answer by pointing. My hand shook with effort and anxiety, but my mind was clear. I took my time, making sure each answer was right. When it was over, Grace studied the results. Mrs. Chen, you scored in the 92nd percentile. That's well within normal cognitive function. Better than normal, actually. She looked at me with new understanding. Someone reported that you were signed into this facility against your will, possibly with forged signatures. Is that correct? I nodded, tears streaming down my face. Finally, someone in authority was listening. "I'll need documentation," Grace said. "Can you show me?" I pointed to the envelope with the admission papers. Grace read through them, her expression growing grimmer with each page. "This signature," she said. "Did you sign this?" I shook my head. "Do you know who did?" I pointed to Sarah's name on the emergency contact list. Grace took photos of everything. "Mrs. Chen, what you're alleging is serious. Fraud, elder abuse, false imprisonment. I need to investigate further, but based on this cognitive assessment, there's clear evidence that you shouldn't be in memory care." She stood to leave, then paused. "It might take a few weeks to sort this out. Can you hang on that long?" I nodded. I'd hung on this long. I could make it a little longer. But my children must have been alerted that something was happening, because 2 days later, they all showed up together. Sarah leading the charge, as always. "Mom," she said, her voice tight with controlled anger. "We heard you've been causing trouble. Calling in state investigators? Really?" I stared at her steadily, let her see that I understood everything. "Dr. Patel is adjusting your medications," Michael added. "Something stronger, to help with these paranoid delusions." Paranoid delusions. They were going to drug me into compliance. "The house sale closes tomorrow," David said. "We need you to understand that this is happening. You're staying here. It's for your own good. For my own good." How many times had I said that to them when they were children? When I wouldn't let them stay up late, or eat candy for dinner, or skip school. But this was different. This was my life they were disposing of. Sarah pulled out more papers. "We need you to sign some banking forms to transfer your accounts." I clamped my mouth shut and put my hands under the blankets. "Don't be difficult," she snapped. "We're doing everything for you. The least you could do is cooperate." But I wouldn't. Not anymore. They left frustrated, and I knew the next battle would be worse. They'd gotten Dr. Patel involved, and sure enough, that evening, Patricia came with new medications. "Doctor's orders," she said firmly. "These are injectable if you won't take them orally." I looked at the pills. Different from before. Stronger. The kind that would make me truly disappear into a chemical fog. I took them. Patricia looked surprised but pleased. "That's better, Mrs. Chen. Cooperation makes everything easier." But I didn't swallow them. I held them under my tongue, a trick I'd learned from Leonard, who'd been doing it for months. After Patricia left, I spit them into a tissue. The next morning, I was supposed to be drowsy, confused, compliant. Instead, I was wide awake when Beverly came in with Dr. Patel and my 3 children. "As you can see," Dr. Patel was saying, "the new medication is helping. She's much calmer." I let my head loll to the side, drooling a little for effect. Sarah looked satisfied. "We have the banking forms," she said. "Mom, we need your thumbprint since you can't sign." They pressed my thumb to an ink pad, then to documents I couldn't read from my position. Transfer papers, probably, or maybe something worse. But I let them do it, playing the part of the drugged patient they wanted me to be. "The house money will be transferred to a trust account," Michael explained, though there was no need since I supposedly couldn't understand. "We'll manage it for her care." A trust account they controlled, no doubt. After they left, celebrating their victory, Leonard wheeled himself into my room. "Brilliant performance," he said. "They have no idea, do they?" I managed a crooked smile. the first real expression I'd achieved since the stroke. Grace Winters called the nursing station yesterday, he continued. Beverly doesn't know I heard. The investigation is moving forward. Your cognitive assessment has been validated by 2 independent specialists. The shit, as they say, is about to hit the fan. But my children struck first. The next day, they filed for emergency guardianship, claiming rapid deterioration. The hearing was scheduled for the following week. If granted, it would supersede everything. The Ombudsman's investigation, any contracts, any hope of freedom. Carmen brought me the news, tears in her eyes. I'm so sorry, Mrs. Chen. I heard them talking. They've got Dr. Patel's testimony, documentation of your non-compliance, everything. The judge will probably rubber stamp it. I felt despair crushing me like a physical weight. They'd won. My own children had won. All those years of sacrifice, of putting them first, of building something to leave them, and this was how it ended. That night, I couldn't maintain the pretense. When Patricia brought the medications, I turned away. Mrs. Chen, you are doing so well, she sighed. Do I need to get the injection? I nodded. Let them drug me. What did it matter now? The injection was cold, spreading through my muscle like ice. Within minutes, the world began to blur at the edges. But just before I went under, Leonard whispered from the doorway, Check your closet tomorrow, behind the spare blankets. I woke the next morning thick-headed and disoriented, the drug still heavy in my system. It took enormous effort to get to the closet, using the walls for support. Behind the blankets, wrapped in a pillowcase, was a manila folder. Inside were copies of documents, not just any documents, but emails between my children, printed somehow. Planning discussions going back months before my stroke. David writing about the house value. Michael calculating how long the money would last. Sarah researching nursing homes and their admission requirements. And there, in black and white, an email from Sarah to her brothers. Dr. Patel agrees to the diagnosis for a cut of the estate sale. Dementia with behavioral disturbances. Once she's medicated, she won't be able to contest anything. They'd planned it all. Even Dr. Patel was in on it. But how had Leonard gotten these? The answer came with Carmen that afternoon. Mr. Leonard asked me to tell you something, she whispered while taking my blood pressure. He says his grandson is a computer expert. Ethical hacker, he called it. When you gave him your children's names, he found things. Public social media, poorly secured email accounts. It's amazing what people put in writing. Evidence. We had evidence. But the guardianship hearing was in 3 days. Even with Grace Winters and her investigation, would it be enough? The answer came in an unexpected form. The night before the hearing, Beverly came to my room with a document. Mrs. Chen, there's been an irregularity in your admission paperwork. We need you to sign this correction. I looked at the paper. It was a new admission agreement, backdated to my arrival date. This one had no arbitration clause, no mention of superseding power of attorney. They were trying to clean up their mistake. I shook my head. Now, Mrs. Chen. Beverly's tone was warning. This is just a formality, a correction. I pointed to my original admission agreement, then to myself, then made a firm gesture of possession. Mine. My agreement. Beverly's face flushed. If you don't sign this, we may have to review your placement here. You could be transferred to a state facility. Is that what you want? A state facility might actually be better than this private prison my children were paying for. I shook my head again, more firmly. Beverly left, clearly frustrated. But she'd revealed something important. They knew there was a problem with the original agreement. They were scared. The morning of the hearing, my children arrived early to transport me to court. They'd dressed me in my worst clothes, hadn't let me fix my hair, wanted me to look as pathetic as possible. "Just sit there and be quiet, Mom," Sarah instructed as they loaded me into the wheelchair van. "This will all be over soon." The courthouse was a blur of marble and fluorescent lights. They wheeled me into a small hearing room where Dr. Patel was already seated, looking uncomfortable in his suit. The judge, an older woman with sharp eyes, reviewed papers at her bench. "This is a petition for emergency guardianship," she began. "I've reviewed the medical documentation. Dr. Patel, you're stating that Mrs. Chen suffers from advancing dementia?" "Yes, Your Honor," Dr. Patel said smoothly, "with behavioral disturbances requiring intensive management." "And the family is in agreement?" "We are," Sarah stood. "We just want what's best for our mother." The judge turned to me. "Mrs. Chen, do you understand why you're here?" I nodded vigorously. "She nods at everything," Sarah interjected. "It doesn't mean understanding." "I'll determine that," the judge said sharply. "Mrs. Chen, I'm going to ask you some questions. Can you point to your oldest child?" I pointed to Michael. "Can you indicate what year it is?" She held up a paper with multiple years written on it. I pointed to 2024. The judge frowned. "Her responses seem appropriate. Dr. Patel, how do you explain?" The door burst open. Grace Winters entered, followed by Leonard's grandson, a young man in a neat suit carrying a laptop. "Your Honor, I'm Grace Winters from the State Ombudsman's Office. I have evidence relevant to this case." Sarah stood up. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular." "So is drugging an elderly woman against her will," Grace shot back. "I have Mrs. Chen's cognitive assessment, scoring in the 92nd percentile. I also have evidence of forged signatures and fraudulent medical records." The judge's eyebrows rose. "Continue." What followed was a systematic demolition of my children's case. Grace presented my cognitive test results. Leonard's grandson, introduced as Marcus Leonard, cybersecurity consultant, presented the emails showing the premeditated nature of the plot. He'd obtained them legally, he assured the court, from publicly accessible social media archives and data breaches already in the public domain. "Your Honor," Marcus said, pulling up an email on his laptop. 3 months before Mrs. Chen's stroke, her daughter Sarah wrote to her brothers about needing to move fast once Mom has any health issue. She goes on to discuss specific nursing homes and how to structure the financial arrangements. Sarah's face was white. "Those were private communications? Posted to a Facebook group for elder law attorneys where you were seeking advice," Marcus corrected. "Very public, actually. But the killing blow came from an unexpected source, the admission agreement itself." Grace pulled out the document. "Your Honor, this agreement was supposedly signed by Mrs. Chen on her admission date. However, it supersedes any power of attorney arrangement. If Mrs. Chen is competent enough to sign this, then she doesn't need guardianship. If she's not competent, then this agreement is fraudulent." The judge studied the document. "Who witnessed this signature?" "The facility administrator and a staff member," Grace said. "But here's the interesting part. Mrs. Chen's children have been acting on her behalf, using a power of attorney that this agreement nullifies. They can't have it both ways." The judge turned to Sarah. "Ms. Chen, Did you read this agreement before your mother supposedly signed it? Sarah's mouth opened and closed like a fish. I'll take that as a no, the judge said dryly. Dr. Patel, I'm very interested in your diagnosis. What tests did you run to determine dementia? Dr. Patel shifted uncomfortably. Standard cognitive assessments. Memory tests. Which specific tests? I'd like to see the results. I don't have them with me. You diagnosed a woman with dementia without documented testing? The judge's voice could have frozen fire. And prescribed antipsychotics? The room was silent. Finally, the judge spoke. I'm denying the guardianship petition. Furthermore, I'm ordering an immediate investigation into potential elder abuse, fraud, and medical malpractice. Mrs. Chen is to be released from Willowbrook Manor immediately unless she chooses to stay. I shook my head so hard my neck cracked. That's clear enough, the judge said. Ms. Winters, please coordinate Mrs. Chen's discharge. As for you three, she looked at my children, I suggest you get attorneys. Good ones. The aftermath was swift and brutal. My children tried to argue, to explain, to justify. But the judge was done listening. Within hours, I was discharged from Willowbrook, Carmen volunteering to drive me home. Except I had no home. It had been sold. Grace had a solution. Emergency housing assistance. There's a senior apartment complex with a unit available. It's not fancy, but it's yours if you want it. I wanted it. Anything was better than Willowbrook. The apartment was small but clean, with windows that actually open and a door I could lock. Carmen helped me settle in with the few possessions my children hadn't sold. The estate sale money is in escrow, Grace explained. The court's frozen all assets pending investigation. Your house sale, too. It'll take time, but you should get most of it back. Most, not all. The legal fees alone would eat up a chunk. And the emotional cost, that was beyond calculation. My children tried to contact me over the following weeks. Sarah left voicemails on the new phone Carmen had helped me get, crying about how she'd only wanted to help. Michael sent letters about the pressure he'd been under, how Sarah had convinced him it was for the best. David simply sent a check for $5,000 with sorry written in the memo line. I didn't respond to any of them. The investigation moved forward slowly. Dr. Patel lost his license. Willowbrook faced massive fines for their admission practices. My children were charged with fraud and elder abuse, though Sarah, ever the lawyer, managed to plead bargain down to lesser charges for all of them. Leonard visited me in my new apartment, bringing groceries and gossip from Willowbrook, where he chose to stay. It's not bad when you're there by choice, he said. Plus, someone needs to keep an eye on them. Carmen graduated and got a job at a different facility, but she still visited weekly, helping me with speech therapy exercises. Slowly, painfully, I began to speak again. Not perfectly, but enough. Why? Was the first clear word I managed to say to her. Why, help. She squeezed my hand. Because everyone deserves to be heard. 6 months later, I sat in a lawyer's office. My lawyer, not Sarah's colleague or friend, but someone I'd hired myself with the money the court had unfrozen. He was explaining the settlement offer. Your children are willing to return the full house sale amount, plus damages. In exchange, you drop the criminal charges. I could speak well enough now to answer. No. Mrs. Chen, trials are difficult, painful. Are you sure? They need consequences, I said slowly but clearly. He nodded. I understand. The trial was indeed painful. Sitting in the courtroom, watching my children in defendants' chairs, listening to the evidence of their betrayal laid out in clinical detail. Sarah broke down crying during her testimony, claiming she'd never meant for it to go so far. Michael said nothing, staring straight ahead. David fidgeted constantly, the same nervous tell from childhood. They were convicted, suspended sentences, community service, and hefty fines, but convicted nonetheless. The local newspaper ran the story with the headline, "Children Convicted in Elder Fraud Scheme." Their reputations, careers, and social standing were destroyed. I took no satisfaction in it. These were still my children, the babies I'd raised, the young adults I'd been so proud of. But they'd made their choices. The house was gone. The new owners were a young family who'd already repainted and remodeled. But I had my apartment, my freedom, and enough money from the settlement to live comfortably. Not lavishly, but comfortably. I thought that was the end of it. Justice served, case closed, life moving forward in whatever way it could after such a betrayal. But I'd forgotten about the original admission agreement. It was Leonard who reminded me, showing up at my apartment with a briefcase and a grin. "Remember that document you didn't sign? The one your daughter forged?" I nodded. "Well, I've been doing some research. That arbitration clause? It's binding on Willowbrook, not just on you. And here's the beautiful part. It includes a provision for damages in cases of improper admission." He pulled out the agreement, pointing to a section I'd overlooked in my initial panic. "Right here. In cases where admission is found to be fraudulent or coerced, the facility bears liability for all damages, emotional and financial, suffered by the resident." "But, children, forged," I managed. "Doesn't matter," Leonard said gleefully. Willowbrook accepted the document. They're responsible for verifying signatures, especially for something as serious as a memory care admission. They didn't do their due diligence. He leaned forward. "You could own them, Vivian. Or at least a very large piece of them." I thought about it. Willowbrook had been complicit, eager to fill a bed, willing to overlook irregularities for the guaranteed income stream my children had promised. Beverly had never questioned why a woman supposedly deep in dementia could sign complex legal documents. "Yes," I said. The arbitration was private, as specified in the agreement. Willowbrook's lawyers came prepared to fight, but Leonard had done his homework. The forged signature, the lack of proper verification, the evidence that staff had participated in keeping me drugged and compliant. It was damning. The arbitrator, a retired judge with no patience for corporate excuses, awarded me $3 million. Willowbrook appealed, tried to invalidate the agreement, claimed I couldn't benefit from a document I hadn't actually signed. But their own arguments trapped them. If the agreement was invalid, then they'd admitted a resident without proper documentation, which opened them to even greater liability. They paid. I used some of the money to buy a house. Not my old house. That belonged to another family now, but a smaller place with a garden. I hired Carmen as my private aide, though I needed less and less help as my recovery progressed. The rest of the money I put in trust. Not for my children, they'd lost that right, but for an organization that investigates elder abuse. The Vivian Chen Foundation for Elder Justice. Leonard serves on the board. My children still try to contact me occasionally. Sarah sends birthday cards with long letters about how sorry she is, how she's getting therapy, how she's learned from her mistakes. Michael emails photos of his children, My grandchildren I'm not allowed to see, due to restraining orders. David just sends those checks, always with "sorry" in the memo line. I donate them to the foundation. I see them sometimes, around town. We live in the same city, after all. Sarah at the grocery store, quickly turning down another aisle. Michael at the bank, pretending not to see me. David drove past my new house once, slowly, but didn't stop. I don't hate them. Hate takes too much energy, and I need my energy for living. But I don't forgive them either. Forgiveness would require trust, and that's something they destroyed beyond repair. Dr. Patel I ran into at a coffee shop last month. He's working as a medical consultant now, his license to practice gone. He tried to apologize, stammering about pressure and mistakes. I just looked at him until he stopped talking and left. The truth is, they all thought I was already gone. The stroke had made me vulnerable, less than perfect, and that was enough for them to write me off. They saw my stumbling speech and trembling hands, and assumed my mind had fled too. It was easier for them that way, to think they were disposing of a shell, not imprisoning a person. But I was always here, trapped in a body that wouldn't cooperate, screaming silently while they discussed my fate over my head. Watching them sign away my life while telling themselves it was for my own good. The admission agreement saved me in the end. That document they never read, thinking it was just paperwork, routine forms to file and forget. Sarah, my lawyer daughter, who'd preached about reading everything, who'd built her career on attention to detail, had been so eager to be rid of me that she'd signed without looking. The irony is perfect and terrible. I keep the agreement in a safety deposit box now, along with the emails, the trial transcripts, all the evidence of what my children tried to do. Sometimes I take it out and look at it. This simple contract that changed everything. The signature that isn't mine but claims to be. The clauses that gave me power when I had none. The proof that even in our darkest moments, when everyone has abandoned us, the smallest oversight can become salvation. They thought they were so clever, my children. They had the doctor, the diagnosis, the documentation. They had my signature, forged but passable. They had the nursing home ready, the house priced, the bank accounts mapped out. They had everything except patience to read what they were signing. One document, one overlooked clause, one assumption that their mother was too far gone to fight back. They were wrong. I'm 71 now. My speech is mostly returned, though I still struggle when tired. My left hand works well enough to tend my garden. I live alone by choice, with cameras at my doors, not for safety but for evidence, should anyone try to take my autonomy again. The young family who bought my old house invited me to dinner once. They'd heard the story, everyone in town had. The mother, sweet and earnest, asked if it was hard to see strangers in my home. No, I told her, and meant it. It's just walls and floors. The home was the people in it, and those people are gone. Not dead. Worse than dead. They're living with the knowledge of what they did, carrying it every day like stones in their stomach. Sarah's law practice dissolved after the trial. Michael lost his accounting firm job. No one wants a CFO convicted of elder fraud. David's construction business folded when word got out. They brought it on themselves, but I take no joy in their suffering. They're still my children, even if I'm no longer their mother. That relationship died in Willowbrook, suffocated under medication and indifference. Leonard died last month, peacefully, in his sleep. in his room at Willowbrook, where he'd chosen to stay. He left me his law books and a note. For the fighter, who reminded me why we fight. I spoke at his funeral, my voice strong despite the tremor. Leonard saw me when I was invisible. He heard me when I was silent. He fought for me when I couldn't fight for myself. That's all any of us want. To be seen, heard, valued. To not be thrown away when we're no longer convenient. His grandson Marcus was there. He told me he started a non-profit that helps elderly people check for digital security issues, making sure their private information stays private. You'd be amazed how many family members are snooping through their parents' emails, he said. Looking for financial information, medical records, anything they can use. Yes, I would be amazed. Nothing amazes me anymore. The truth about family is that they know exactly where to strike. They know your weaknesses, your fears, your vulnerable moments. They know when you're too tired to fight and too proud to ask for help. They know that you'll forgive them because that's what family does. Until you don't. Until they push too far, take too much, assume too easily that your love is infinite and your patience has no end. My children learned that lesson too late. They thought my stroke had erased me, made me less than human, something to be managed rather than someone to be loved. They thought their power of attorney gave them power over everything, including my dignity. They never read the admission agreement. If they had, they would have seen Section 12, subsection 5. In the event of disputed admission, resident retains the right to independent review by state authorities, regardless of power of attorney status. They would have seen Section 8. Facility assumes full liability for verification of all signatures and consent forms. They would have seen Addendum A, which I'd found weeks after the trial. Resident may designate an alternative healthcare advocate at any time, superseding previous arrangements, if mentally competent, as determined by independent evaluation. So many escape hatches, so many protections, all hidden in plain sight in a document they considered beneath their notice. The young nursing student, Carmen, visits weekly. She's a full RN now, working at a better facility, where she advocates for patients who can't advocate for themselves. She tells me stories sometimes, carefully anonymized, about families trying to rush admissions, about documents that don't quite match up, about elderly people whose fear is visible in their eyes, even when their mouths can't speak. I always check now, she says. Every signature, every form. I think about you and I check. That's something, at least. My pain serving as someone else's protection. The speech therapist I work with asked me once if I'd consider reconciliation therapy with my children. Families can heal, she said. All optimism and good intentions. With work, with time. Some things, I told her carefully, each word a small victory, are meant to stay broken. She didn't understand. She's young, still believes in redemption and second chances. She hasn't learned yet that some betrayals cut too deep, leave scars that won't knit, create chasms that can't be bridged. My children wanted my money, my house, my things. But more than that, they wanted my erasure. They wanted me gone, not just from my home, but from existence as a thinking, feeling person. They wanted to forget I was their mother and remember only that I was their burden. They succeeded in taking my home, my possessions, my place in their lives. But they failed to take my mind, my will, my ability to fight. And in the end, that failure cost them everything. The admission agreement sits in my safety deposit box, a simple document that became my salvation. Sometimes I think about the employee at Willowbrook who created it, probably following some corporate template, adding clauses to protect the facility, without realizing they'd also created protections for residents. An accidental hero who'll never know what they did. Or maybe they did know. Maybe someone, somewhere in Willowbrook's corporate structure, had enough conscience to build in those escape hatches, those protections, those small provisions that could save someone like me. I'll never know, and it doesn't matter. What matters is that I'm here, in my own home, with my own life, my own choices. My speech is imperfect, but improving. My left hand is weak, but functional. My children are strangers, who share my DNA and nothing else. The garden is coming along nicely. Tomatoes and peppers, the same varieties I grew in my old house. The neighbor's cat has found me here somehow, and comes for breakfast every morning. I've named him Leonard, and he's excellent company. Independent, dignified, asking for nothing more than food and occasional acknowledgement. This morning, I found another envelope from David pushed under my door. Not a check this time, but a letter. I recognized his handwriting, still terrible after all these years. I burned it unread in the fireplace, watching the paper curl and blacken. Whatever words he'd written, whatever justification or apology or explanation he'd offered, I don't need to know. Some stories are better left unfinished, some words better left unheard. The admission agreement gave me my freedom, but it also gave me something more valuable, proof that my children's betrayal was not my failure as a mother, but theirs as human beings. I raised them better than this. I taught them to read contracts, to treat people with dignity, to honor their elders. They chose to forget those lessons. Now they live with the consequences of their choices, just as I live with the consequences of trusting them. The difference is, I've rebuilt, I've recovered. I've found a new life, smaller perhaps, but entirely my own. They're still trapped in the ruins of their greed. The last time I saw Sarah was in court, during the final settlement hearing. She approached me afterward, tears streaming down her face. "Mom, please," she said, "let me explain. Let me try to make this right." I looked at her, this stranger wearing my daughter's face, and said the clearest words I'd managed since the stroke. "You are not my daughter?" She collapsed then, sobbing on the courthouse steps. Her brothers rushed to comfort her, shooting me looks of anger and hurt, as if I was the one who'd wronged them, as if I'd forged their signatures, sold their homes, locked them away. The security guard asked if I needed assistance getting to my car. I didn't. I walked away on my own 2 feet, slow but steady, leaving them behind. That's the part they never understood. I didn't need them. They thought I was helpless without them. But I'd survived their father leaving, raised them alone, built a life from nothing. I could survive this too. The admission agreement was my weapon, but my will was my strength. Even drugged, dismissed, and discarded, I never stopped fighting. Every refused medication, every gesture toward Leonard, every attempt to communicate with Carmen, they were acts of resistance, small rebellions that eventually toppled their carefully constructed prison. In the end, they signed their own destruction. Sarah's hand moving across that signature line, forging my name with practiced ease, thinking she was signing my life away. Instead, she was signing their confession. The young family in my old house planted new roses where mine used to grow. Different varieties, bright reds and yellows, instead of my subtle pinks and whites. Change is inevitable, I suppose, but I drive by sometimes, just to see the garden evolving, to know that something grows where I once grew things. My story ends here, in this small house with its growing garden and visiting cat, with my speech returning word by word and my independence fiercely guarded. It's not a happy ending. Too much was lost for happiness. But it's a just ending, a right ending, an ending I chose rather than one chosen for me. My children sent me to a nursing home, but they never read the contract I signed. No, they never read the contract they signed for me. In my name, assuming my voice, my will, my consent. That assumption cost them everything. Their mother, their inheritance, their reputations, their futures, all for want of reading a document, for the laziness of skimming where they should have studied, for the arrogance of assuming I was already gone. I wasn't gone. I was right there, watching them sign my life away, remembering every word, every gesture, every moment of their betrayal. And when the opportunity came, hidden in their own haste and hubris, I took it. The admission agreement saved me. But I saved myself first by refusing to disappear, refusing to be erased, refusing to go quietly into that good night they'd prepared for me. I'm still here. They're the ones who are gone. I water my garden every evening now, watching the sun set over the fence, thinking about nothing in particular. The past is past, the future is mine alone, and the present, this moment, this breath, this small act of tending growing things, is enough, more than enough. It's everything they tried to take and couldn't. It's life on my terms, by my choice, in my time. The contract sits in its safety deposit box, a paper reminder that sometimes the smallest oversight can change everything. One document, one signature, one assumption too many. My children thought they were sending me away to die. Instead, they signed their own ending and gave me a new beginning. I never thanked them for that. I never will. Some gifts are too bitter to acknowledge, even when they save us. Especially when they save us. The sun is setting now, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. The cat is waiting for his dinner. The garden needs watering. Life goes on, smaller than before, but infinitely more precious because I almost lost it. Not to death, to family. Which, I've learned, can be worse. Death at least has the dignity of ending. What they tried to do would have left me lingering, a ghost in my own existence, forgotten but still breathing, erased but still aware. The admission agreement stopped them. One piece of paper they didn't read. Such a small thing to save a life. Such a small thing to destroy 3 others. But then, the most important things often are small. A clause in a contract. A willing ear when everyone else has turned away. The difference between a signature freely given and one forged in greed. Details matter. My daughter knew that once. She forgot it when it mattered most. I haven't. I won't. And that, more than any settlement or vindication, is my victory. I remain myself, intact if scarred, free if cautious, alive in all the ways that matter. My children sent me to a nursing home. They never read the contract. And that made all the difference.